So we have Todd Thurman, who's going to be speaking next on artificial intelligence. So we are going to be talking about AI, but the different AI this morning compared to maybe what we'll talk about this afternoon. But Todd comes from us from the International Swine Management Consulting firm and is the founder and CEO of Swine Insights International. Todd brings over 25 years of global pork industry experience to the stage, providing hard-hitting analysis of the challenges and opportunities facing our industry. With hands-on experience across 17 countries, Todd and his team have advised many of the world's largest pork producers, helping them improve the productivity, profitability, and sustainability of their operations. Todd's presentation transforms complex industry challenges into practical and actionable strategies while offering unique global big-picture perspectives. So Todd, we welcome you to the stage and look forward to your talk.
So there's always a little bit of anxiety when you're speaking about whether the technology is going to work or not. When you're speaking on a technology topic that is a little more intense, because you really do feel like kind of a fool if you're up there talking about advanced technologies and you can't get a projector to work. So we'll see how this goes. So far, so good. So about this time last year, I got my first invitation to come speak about the topic of AI, and I reached out to a friend of mine who's been in AI for a long time, more than 25 years. Back before we even had terms like generative AI and before anybody knew what an LLM was. And I told him, I said, I don't feel like I'm qualified to give this presentation. And he said, well, nobody's qualified to give the presentation, so don't worry about it. You know, this thing is changing so fast that whatever you say is probably going to be out of date, because while you were, being introduced, this new technology came out and everything you talk about is now obsolete. So, but he said everybody else is dealing with the same issues. And then I think he was trying to, give me some confidence, but he said, if you want to be an expert on a topic, you either have to pick a topic that you know a whole lot about, or you have to pick a topic that nobody knows anything about. And he said, so this is a good combination. You know a lot about pork production, and nobody knows anything about AI. So we'll see how it goes. So far, so good. This has been one of those topics that has become mandatory. If you're putting together an event, you have to make sure that you have somebody talking about AI. The good news is there's no shortage of things to talk about. One thing that I have noticed is there's been a bit of a sea change in terms of people's attitudes towards AI. And I think it's become a lot more negative. And I sort of foresaw that coming, and I think it's very understandable. And so I'll try to touch a little bit on some of those bigger picture things that we're dealing with when it comes to AI. But I really want this to stay very practical. It's very easy for someone to get up and talk about, okay, here's where things are going, and in 2 or 3 years, we're going to be able to do this, and in 5 years, we're going to be able to do that. What I really think is a lot more important is what can we do right now, today? And so I'm going to share with you some examples, some use cases in a little bit, and everything that I'm going to share with you in terms of those use cases, you can do right now with tools that are easily accessible. I will spend a couple of slides there at the end to try to give you an idea of where I think this thing is going over the next couple of years. Those are educated guesses at best. But I'm going to try to spend the majority of the time kind of setting the table and then sharing with you some practical tools that you can use today, that you can go out when you get finished here, you can go out tomorrow morning and start playing around with these things. So this is one of those technologies that it's great when it works, and it's terrible when it doesn't. There's a QR code up there. A lot of people tell you put your phones up. I tell you to get them out. If you scan that QR code with your phone camera, it'll take you and give you an opportunity to answer these questions. And there'll be 2 or 3 of these slides throughout. And you can see somebody has already figured it out. The question here is, how do you feel about AI? Are you mostly excited? Are you mostly concerned? Or is it a mixture of both? And so far, we've got quite a few responses in already, and this is pretty consistent with what I'm seeing. You guys may be a little more optimistic than some of the groups that I've been speaking to lately. What I've been seeing is a lot of people say mostly excited, a lot of people say mostly concerned, but almost everybody is feeling a mixture of both. And I think if I was going to answer that question, I would probably put myself in that category of a mixture of both. There seems to be like a lot of polarization in this topic. So you have your AI optimists, the people that talk about, oh, we're heading towards abundance, we're heading towards a utopia, and then the other extreme is this dystopia. I do find it a little bit interesting that sometimes the utopias scare me more than the dystopias. The reality is we're probably going to land somewhere in the middle, right? If you're an extreme dystopian or an extreme utopian, you're almost certainly wrong. We're going to be somewhere in the middle. And so I'm trying to be kind of a voice for moderation there. But I would definitely say I'm both of these things. I wake up some mornings much more excited and some mornings much more concerned. If you're not at least a little bit of both, you're probably not paying close enough attention. This is going to be sort of a related question, but this gives you an opportunity to input a word that comes to mind. So what are some words that come to mind when you think of AI? Robot, control, fast, troubleshooting. God, you guys are really optimistic. Assistant, innovation, that's a good one. Really good ones there. Efficiency, tool, Terminator, there's a little bit of a negative one. I'm very pleased to hear that you guys seem to be a lot more optimistic than most of the groups that I've been talking to lately. These have gotten a little dark, actually, when I've done it on a few, and it's a little uncomfortable. If you want to be uncomfortable, by the way, go look on YouTube there was several high-profile people that gave commencement addresses this past graduation season, and when they mentioned AI, a lot of them got booed, and I mean, it is really uncomfortable. The kids would say cringe, but I mean, it's just like hard to watch, and they clearly were not expecting it. So there's definitely something going on here. But I think a lot of those words are fantastic examples. So I always try to give away the punchline at the beginning in case anybody falls asleep. What are we talking about? So what? Why should you care? And then now what? What are we going to do about it? So the what is generative AI is a powerful and rapidly developing technology that I think is going to have a profound impact on how we do business. The reason I think you should be paying attention to it and that you should care about it is that your competition is increasingly implementing this technology into their own workflows, and you're probably not behind yet, but now is the time to act. I said back in January that I felt like nobody was behind in terms of AI. There's some characteristics about AI that make it easy to catch up, and that's good news. I do feel like that maybe by the end of this year, that might not be quite as true. I feel like it's moving fast enough. It's beginning to gain some traction. I really feel like if you feel like you're behind, you're not behind, but you probably need to try to get caught up here fairly quickly. And then now what? That's the big question. I'm just going to try to give you some tools, some things to think about, maybe help you begin to build a framework for thinking about where this is going and how that impacts you in your day-to-day work and even in your personal life and in your organizations. And so I'll talk a little bit about understanding the technology, some practical steps to implementation. So if I've not even dipped my toes in yet, what do I need to do to get started? And then I'll talk about some challenges and obstacles. And I'll give you a preview there. There's a lot more challenges than there is solutions at this point. And so I think that's driving some of the negativity, but if that's the reason that people are a little negative, I certainly understand that. And then again, I'm going to share a couple of slides talking about preparing for the future, trying to help you imagine what we're looking at a little bit further down the road. So just to give me a little context here, we got one more question. Which of these best describes how often you're using AI? Is it daily, weekly, occasionally? rarely, never, and then my favorite, never will. Again, you guys are much higher on the daily. What I've been seeing a lot in my last few presentations is, weekly seems to be ticking up. Occasionally is probably the most common, and I'm a little surprised we haven't gotten a never will yet. I had a couple of really vocal never wills in my last presentation, and it was right before lunch as well, and I was glad because I was glad that they didn't have any food to be tossing up to the stage. This is again really, really positive, and that really helps me understand your perspective. So I really want to try to give you a little bit of a wake-up call. I think the industry is maybe sleeping on this issue a little bit. There is some pretty good indications that agriculture in general, and maybe animal agriculture specifically, is one of the slower industries to adopt this technology. I think that's probably generally true for most technology, but I think there's some reasons that I'll talk about later where I think you have a less of an excuse. I think some of our hesitance to adopt previous technologies has been more justified because of some of the investments that we have to make, because of our profit margins. This is really easy to at least begin to implement without making any real significant investments. And so I just want to give everybody a kind of a little bit of a wake-up call to say that I think this is going to profoundly change the way we do things, and that the pace of change is staggering. It's wild. Every time I give a presentation about AI, I have somebody that comes up and say, "Look, I tried it. I wasn't really impressed. Well, when did you try it?" It's about a year ago. And I'm like you drove a Model T and you're critiquing a Ferrari here, and it's just I can't even emphasize to you how difficult it is to keep up with the pace of change. Even people who are doing this full time, it's their job to keep up, are telling me when I reach out to them for insights, are telling me, look, I don't feel like I'm keeping up. I feel like I'm falling behind because it's just moving so quickly. The good news, and I think this is really fantastic news, is that I don't think you're behind, and you're not inescapably behind no matter how little you've done with AI. It is a very easy thing to begin to implement, okay? You can use plain English language. You don't have to have any special skills. It's cheap. You can use free versions. I'm going to encourage you to use the paid version, at least try out the paid version here in a little bit. But there's free versions out there that'll definitely give you a taste. Not many of those obstacles that have existed for previous technologies in terms of adopting it or deploying it really apply to AI, and that's one of the reasons why it's moving so much more quickly. And so that's going to create some challenges, but it also, the good news is it makes it a lot easier if you're wanting to get out there and get a taste of what it can do. So here's a few things. If you haven't done these things, then you don't have a real good feel of what these tools are capable of. So if you haven't experimented with the models in the last few weeks, they've changed significantly in the last few weeks. I suspect they're probably going to change this week too. We're expecting some new models to be released. So make sure you're up to date. I'm going to encourage you to get a paid subscription. You can get a pretty good taste with the free models, the free access, and you probably should use that if you haven't developed a preference for a model. You probably should use that to try them out. But once you decide on one that's a good fit for you, go ahead and get the paid subscription. It's roughly $20 a month, and if you don't like it, you can cancel it after a month or two. But that really does open it up and makes it a lot easier to see what these things are capable of. If you've not run the deep research report, Gemini is probably the easiest one to do that. You open up Gemini, you click on the little plus, and it tells you, gives you an option of running a deep research report. And what that's going to do is it's going to go out and do a lot of research. It usually takes it about 30 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer. And then it'll come back with probably a 12 to 15 page paper on that topic. And I encourage you to do two things there. If you haven't done a deep research report, go run one on something that you're very familiar with, a topic that you're an expert on or a near expert on, and then run another one on a topic that you don't know a whole lot about, but that you're interested in. One of the things that you have to be careful about is these things are really good at sounding legit, right? And if you're sort of on the edge, you have sort of a cursory understanding of a topic, it can be very convincing. And that's why I encourage you to go run one on something that you know a lot about, because you will find some things in there where you're like, okay, that's not quite right, or I'm not familiar with that paper, and then you go run it down and you find out it completely made it up. These things are happening less, but they're still a problem. But I think that'll give you a really good idea, and it's like a mini agent, right? You hear a lot about agents. I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But it gives you an idea of kind of what that would be like to turn something over, turn a project over to the AI. Go grab some lunch, come back 30 minutes later, you've got a report that you can read through that's pretty useful in terms of generating an understanding of a topic. Build an application with no code assistance. This is really easy to do too. Again, Gemini's probably the easiest one. You open up what's called the canvas, and you ask it to build you a model of a concept. So you give it any sort of concept, and what it will do is it'll use code to build a model to demonstrate that concept. I can give you some examples. If you reach out, my contact information will be at the end. I can give you some prompts if you're struggling with thinking of something to put in there. But that gives you a really good idea of the capability of being able to build these little mini software applications. And I think that's going to be one of the more profound applications here. That doesn't mean that you can go build an app with an idea and you have an idea over breakfast and by that afternoon it's on the App Store. That's not, we might get there at some point, but we're not there yet. But what I've been able to do, and anybody that's worked with software developers will tell you that communicating your vision of what you want is the biggest challenge. And so what this allows you to do is create a sort of mocked up version of that. I've never been capable of that before. I'm capable of that now. And that makes it much, much easier for me to communicate to the software development team what I want this to be able to look like and what I want it to do. And so that's really easy. And so they can take that last few miles and make sure that it's safe and that it functions all the time and then it's deployable depending on what you want to do with it. And then I encourage you to educate yourself about AI agents. If you're hesitant to utilize these agents and deploy these agents, you may have heard about some of these agents that are out there. Basically, an agent goes and does things on your behalf. It can have access to your files if you give it to them, and it's going to go create projects and do things, and then come back with a completed project. If that makes you a little bit nervous, it should make you nervous, right? But it is extremely powerful. So if you're hesitant to go out and try it yourself, I understand that. I'm hesitant myself to go out and try some of those things myself. But go find a YouTube video, find some examples of some people that are, it's not hard to find, people that are demonstrating use cases, and it'll help give you a little bit of a flavor for what's possible. And then if you've not enabled the memory features, I know this creeps some people out too. It definitely creeps me out. If you've been using this for a while, go ask ChatGPT or whatever model you're using, what do you know about me? And it's really creepy. It starts, telling you things that you didn't realize you'd told it and all that kind of stuff. So if that creeps you out, I totally understand that. But it's also super useful because it remembers the context of previous conversations, and it'll sometimes ask you, oh, we've talked about something similar. Is that what you're wanting to talk about, or is this something different? And sometimes I even forget, because I use different models, I forget which one I was working on certain projects with, and I'm like, yeah, that is what I want to do. And so you can kind of go back to a previous project and sort of extend that. So I encourage you to think about doing that. Again, if that creeps you out, don't do it. It's not a complete loss, but it does really help to give you an idea of kind of how the tools can be more valuable when they have more context about you. Okay, so this is the elephant in the room. This is the reason that the people were booing the commencement speakers. Is AI going to take your job? And eventually, I don't think anybody knows where this is headed. My answer would be eventually, maybe, but not probably in the near future. I don't think it's really going to take anybody's job completely. In fact, I think this is the wrong way to look at it. I don't think we need to be thinking about whether AI can replace jobs right now. I think what we need to be thinking about is AI can, in some cases, replace work. And so work is a component of jobs, but it is not a job, okay? And really, I think it's helpful to break that work down into 3 steps. Broadly speaking, no matter what your job is, you spend a percentage of your time deciding what to do, a percentage of your time deciding how to do it, and then lastly, a percentage of your time doing that thing. If you are a more individual contributor, if you're more in an entry-level role, you're probably spending a lot more time doing that thing. If you're at a senior management level, you're probably spending the majority of your time deciding what to do. And if you're in the middle management position, if you're running a small business, if you're running a farm, you probably spend a lot of time in each of those categories. And so I think that's a useful framework to think about it. And I'm going to give you, on the next slide, I'm going to give you sort of a matrix there that I think helps visualize kind of where we're at and where we're going with that. But I really want you to really focus on not, is AI going to take my job? Is AI going to replace radiologists or swine veterinarians or whatever it is? It's going to replace portions of your job. It's going to allow you the opportunity to refocus on other things. And that, I think, is the more useful framework to think about it, at least for now. So what I'm encouraging people to think about is the unit of analysis here is really the task. And so if we think about tasks becoming workflows and then workflows becoming jobs, I think that's the most helpful way to think about it. And so what I've done here is I've used those 3 categories that I described before: deciding what to do, deciding how to do it, and doing that thing. And I've given you an example here, and these are not empirical numbers, these are conceptual numbers, so don't get too carried away with these percentages. And it varies a lot depending on what your particular role is. But what I'm saying here is this: with no AI, this blue column here, let's say you spend about 20% of your time deciding what to do, about 20% of your time deciding how to do it, and then the rest of your time, more than half, doing that thing. That's pretty typical of a wide swath of different types of jobs. What I think this is moving towards is it's this combination of human and AI can do a lot of that, doing that thing. So I have that going from a human doing 60% to the human doing 20%, and then the AI spending about 80% of its time doing the job, doing the work. It will spend a bit of its time deciding how to do things. As you start to make that transition into more agentic type models where it's a little more than just a question and answer back and forth with a chatbot, you'll start to feel that it can kind of sort out maybe better or faster or more efficient ways of doing things. But it's going to spend almost 0% of its time deciding what to do. And so as we think about what is uniquely human, I think you can make an argument that AI will never be able to do that, right? And the reason that AI would never be able to do that is because that requires values, okay? So if anybody's I'm a consultant, I give advice to people for a living, right? And I often tell people, I can help you make a decision, but I can't make that decision for you because that's a values judgment. It's what is more important to you. And I can give you information that can inform that decision, but I can't make that decision for you because it's up to you to apply your value judgments to make those decisions on how to move forward. And I think there's a good case to be made that AI will never be able to do that. It will be able to help you do that, but it will never be able to actually make those types of decisions for you. Here's another framework that I think is useful. I've called it the phases of AI adoption. There's 5 or 6 different versions out here, and they all say basically the same thing. So if you have another one you prefer, that's fine. But it's basically augmentation, automation, and then acceleration. So when you first start playing with AI and you first start thinking about, okay, what could I do with this? You're going to be doing question and answers. You're going to do it to help you with research. You're going to get it to help you summarize a paper that you don't want to spend 4 hours reading. You're going to, this more interactive stuff. That is augmenting you. You're using that as a tool, right? So you've got a bunch of nails that need to be driven, and the AI is a hammer. Okay, if you don't apply the effort, then nothing's going to happen. If you just lay the hammer down and walk off, come back later, nails aren't going to be driven. Okay, so it makes you better, it augments you, it makes you better, faster, maybe better and faster at whatever the task is that you're doing. And that's where most people are today. The 95% plus of the utilization of AI would fall into this category. Automation is when you begin to turn over action to an AI. So the example that I gave you before of a deep research report, you would basically tell it, this is what I want to learn about, this is a topic I want to understand better. Then you go make a sandwich and you come back and it's completed the job. I mean, it's not perfect for sure, but it has completed that work. So there you didn't actually have to do a lot of the work. It was working independently of your effort. You can go do something else, and it's fulfilling your directions. But it's not taking any actions that are irreversible, right? So you're going to come back and you're going to audit that. So you're doing less things. You're not as, it's not as energy intensive, and I'm going to give you an example of this in a minute. But you're not completely turning anything over. The acceleration is where very few folks are at yet, but we're starting to see some signs of this. And this is completely turning things over to an AI, hopefully with some parameters that make it safe and manageable. But this opens up a whole opportunity to do things that you were never able to do before. So you can really potentially accelerate your business by being able to do things that were just implausible, impractical, or even impossible. One example of that is once we get these cameras fine-tuned, you're going to be able to have a continuous analysis of these feeds and all of the data that's coming in there. There's no system in the world where you can have somebody sitting in every barn observing pigs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That is going to become, some would say it's already there. I would say it's close but not refined, but that is going to become possible. That's something that you were not able to do at all before. And so I think it's helpful to break it down into these categories as well. We can think about these both in terms of your individual, where you're at with AI. I think everybody is going to experience a shift towards slowly doing more and more to the right. And again, I think we're starting to see some of the early indications of that. I'm going to skip these questions based on some previous questions and in the interest of time. One of the things that I'm doing with pretty much everybody is having everyone sit down and do a process map for their job. And it can be really intense, take some time. You don't have to do it all in one fell swoop, but really be breaking down the things that you do on a day-to-day basis. And once you break it down in a process map, it allows you to start thinking about, okay, here's the tasks that I'm actually doing. Which of those could I potentially either augment or automate? And I'll talk a little bit about what that would mean on the next slide. And this is just an example. This is a physical task, so there's not a ton of automation opportunities. But everybody does it a little bit differently. I just open up a spreadsheet. I keep it real simple. I break down the task, try to keep it as detailed as possible. So the task is in the middle. That's the step-by-step process of whatever it is I'm doing. This one was castration. And then on the right-hand side, I put whatever tools I use, whether that's software or physical tools or anything that I need to be able to complete the task. And then on the left-hand side, it's the people. This one's pretty straightforward. It's just the farrowing tech is doing these steps. But if there's someone that needs to come in and audit that, someone that would help you with a step in that process, there may be multiple people involved at certain steps. And once you have everything process mapped out, and this is a very familiar process to manufacturers, Once you have everything process mapped out, then you can go in and start looking for easy opportunities to either augment or automate that process. And that's what we're going to talk about next. And what I like to do is I've created this sort of 2x2 decision matrix to say, okay, what are we wanting to automate? And really what we want to automate, ideally, is those things that are automatable, easily automatable, and those things that people don't like to do. Undesirable tasks that are easily automatable. And so if we can go through there and identify those should be your highest priority. Nobody's going to be upset about that. It's basically generally tedious work, crap work that nobody else wants to do, and it's something that we can fairly easily automate. So those things, there's really no reason not to pursue that automation. The tricky one is the things that people enjoy doing, that people find desirable, that is automatable. I think there's plenty of opportunities right now. We're probably going to have to cross an uncomfortable bridge at some point there. There's plenty of opportunities in these other categories. Just leave those alone. People are happy doing it. We've got probably easier fish to fry, probably bigger fish to fry. Let's focus somewhere else. Those things that are both low in desirability and in automatability, those are the things that you're looking to try to distribute, right? Or to augment. Right. So maybe there's some things we can't offload that task, but maybe we can give you a tool through AI that will allow it to be a little less painful, a little easier for you to spend a little less percentage of your time working on those projects. And so that's just sort of a decision matrix. Once you've identified all those steps, it allows you to kind of prioritize those things that you want to really be working on. And so the things that are easy to automate, relatively easy to automate, are decisions that are stable and they reliably produce the same outputs with the same inputs. So if it's one of those things that is routine and you can very predictably expect that if I do these inputs consistently, I'm going to get this output consistently, that is fairly easily automatable. Low ambiguity inputs. Okay, so if you have to use a lot of judgment, that's probably not a good candidate, at least for now, for automation. High frequency, low variance, low cost of a single error becoming a real big problem. If it makes one mistake and that's going to cause a huge problem to your business, probably don't look to automate that. The action is digital. That's been the big thing that we all missed here, right? We all thought that physical processes were going to be fairly easy to automate and cognitive processes were be difficult to automate, and we got that perfectly wrong. We were completely wrong about that. So for now, and robotics is coming along quickly, but for now, if that action is digital, if you can do it on a computer moving around a mouse, it's a good candidate for automation. And it produces a clear and auditable output. Those things that basically are not those things are things we should look at augmenting, okay? And so we'll take the tool, we'll hopefully make those processes, those tasks, less painful if they're undesirable, or make you more efficient so that you can do more of what you enjoy doing is really the way I think we need to think about that. I'm going to skip a couple of these, but I'm going to go real quickly through some examples. These are things that we've done in our business. They're all things you can do tomorrow. They're all really easy. And I think they kind of communicate where we're at in terms of what these models are capable of. I'm sure some of you in the room do farm visit reports. As a consultant, I'm constantly doing farm visit reports. I write a bunch of them. I have not outsourced writing to the AI. I'm not judging anybody that has. I feel like that is an important part of my process to be able to write that out. And so my output on this is an outline. So I get a bullet point that is in the format that we write farm visit reports in. So it's formatted and I get bullet points, and then I go in and use that outline and I write the report. But I'm collecting all different kinds of inputs. So multimodal, I'm taking photographs from my farm visit, I'm taking communications, before the visit and after the visit. I'm taking data. I'm all dumping that in, and I am using, for the most part, Notebook LM to store that data. And Notebook LM is a Google tool. If you haven't used it, it's awesome. And I can't believe it's free. These guys are crazy for giving that away. But basically what Notebook LM is it's a grounded AI model, okay? So it's only going to reference the material that you give it, the source material that you give it. And so if you put a bunch of information in a notebook from a farm visit and then you ask it about a sports question, it's going to answer you, there's nothing in the source material that says anything about this. I don't know what you're talking about, basically. If you ask that of a general AI model, they're going to go out to the internet. It's going to go to its training data. It's going to give you an answer to your question. One of the big complaints has always been it never says I don't know, right? Well, Notebook LM will, because if you don't provide it the answers, it's not going to have the answers. And that sounds like a simple thing, but if you'll just let yourself think about that, it makes it super powerful because you have a lot less of this hallucination. And so I put it all in there, and then I have it generate, based on all of that input, an outline. It always needs a little bit of tweaking, but the more you do it, the more examples you give of previous reports, the more context you give it, the better it is. And I've gotten to where I'm doing very little tweaking on the outline before I go in and start writing my report. This is an interesting one. I'm going to try to show you an example of what this is. We do a lot of work in China, and Chinese are not exactly known for good data. So we took on a new client, and they had a real problem. Wean cells were super thin. And so we got to get this under control. Sows were too fat in gestation. They were too thin coming out. Common problem in China. So we went in and made some changes, and they're measuring back fat on every sow, before and after. We went and made some changes to our gestation feeding program and our lactation feeding program. And so this was a 6-month follow-up, and I said, can you send me the data so we can look and see how that worked out? Were you successful in making some of those changes? See if this link works. It's been working about 50% of the time. I'm going to go ahead and open this up for you because it's pretty impressive. So this is what I got from the client. And this is just a bunch of data. And half of it was in Chinese. I don't speak Chinese. So that's a problem. And there, you can see down here at the bottom, there is a ton of worksheets in this workbook. It's just a ton of data. And so what I would normally do is spend 3 or 4 hours sorting that data, digging through it, trying to figure out a really simple question. Are we making progress here? Instead, I gave it to Claude, and it basically added this sheet, analyzed all the data, so it created these columns, and it knew what we were using as definitions for thin, ideal, and fat, sorted them by that, gave me a color-coded demonstration of that, created, you'll see here, it created a chart, or it says, okay, this is what we said is high ideal, this is low ideal, we're making progress. And so if you can see that, you can see we're moving in the right direction, making good progress. A really high percentage of our sows are now in that target range. And then it even gave me some notes and summarized kind of the trends that I was able to copy and paste over into a word processor and be able to utilize in understanding what was going on. It cleaned the data. It said, look, we had some that there was no entry, and so I excluded that. There was some that looked like a typo. You know, it was 18 millimeters, but it said 188. I think that probably meant 18, but I just excluded it. Go back in, correct that, and I'll put it back in. I mean, it did probably 4 hours worth of work. And then I went back and checked everything, and it's remarkably accurate. I mean, there was really nothing that I would have done differently in terms of correcting any mistakes that it made, things like that. That took about 40 minutes, and it asked me 3 questions. It interrupted, itself 3 times to ask me a question. What do you want to do with this? So I encourage you to play with that. Anything you're doing from a data analysis standpoint, let it have a crack at it. it will go in there and make changes to your data. So create another copy. Don't give it the only database that you have. That way, if something goes sideways, you can just start all over and go back and grab the original version. So I think that should be a helpful demonstration. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. We do a lot of custom SOPs for clients, and that is a very intense process because it is individualized. And so we also do training. Once we've done the SOP, we train them on the SOPs that we help them develop. And we've used Notebook LM to be able to put those materials into Notebook LM and generate training materials. So if anybody's ever created test exam questions, it is a lot harder than it seems like, and it's really time consuming. And now we can do it 25 questions at a time on specific topics, and it just kicks them out. And some of them are bad, and you just delete those and use other ones. And so that's just cut about 90 hours per project for us out of that. And again, that's not fun work that anybody's really wanting to do. And so not only that, it has given us some additional tools. So we have a policy that you have to pass the exam at a certain level to get certified, and you get to retake it. And so we always just sent them home with the materials. If they didn't pass it, come back the next morning and try again. Most of the time they would pass. But now we have the ability to create customized study materials for them based on the questions that they got right and the questions that they got wrong. And we give them a little tutor. And there's a 20-minute basically lecture that we customize for them. And we can do it in any language and send them home with that. And now we found that 100% of people will pass the exam the next day. And then the last one's kind of fun, robo-advisor. This is the one I always like to do. I spoke at a dairy conference a while back, and an older gentleman came up. He's one of the global leading experts in amino acid supplementation in dairy cattle. And I had talked about this robo-advisor thing. And so that night, he asked me a bunch of questions, and that night, I went back to my hotel room, and I downloaded a bunch of his papers, basically everything I could find that wasn't behind a paywall, and it was probably 50 or 60 papers. Put it all in Notebook LM, and then I emailed it to him and said, hey, go in and ask it the questions that you get all the time, and see how good a job it does of answering it like you would, because it's referencing all of your published material. And the next morning, he tracked me down at breakfast and said, thanks a lot for that. I was up until like 2 a.m. asking it questions, and it was pretty good. And I was even asking it questions that I didn't know the answer to. And so if you think about being able to make yourself a resource to people that you wouldn't otherwise be able to reach, or make yourself a lot more accessible, again, this is one of those things that can kind of creep people out a little bit. But if you're like me, I realize that 80% of the questions that people ask me are questions that I've answered 100 times before. And the real value is the other 20%. If I could spend less time answering those same questions over and over again somehow, or be able to access an audience that I wouldn't be able to access otherwise, there's some real potential unlocks here. You can do this with Notebook LM. If you want to try to monetize it or make it more secure or whatever, you're going to have a more professional tool. And there's a tool called the Delphi AI that you can do that if you want to kind of take it to the next level. But you can basically test drive it with Notebook LM. Okay, running low on time here. Obstacles. I think the biggest obstacle is just knowing what it can do, coming up with ideas of use cases. We've been doing workshops with our clients, just sharing examples of use cases. That stimulates a lot of times some good ideas. Poor access to data, usable context. The more context you can give these tools, the better. And so we've got some advice that we can give clients on how to structure that, how to make that a little easier and also secure. There's a lot of fear and personal objections. People don't want to do it. They feel threatened by it, whatever reason. I understand a lot of those. This is the biggest one, data security. And probably the next one is data security. And then the last one is data security. This is the real hang up for a lot of folks. So for me, the big concern is, I want to be able to use my clients' data, use these AI tools with my clients' data. They're concerned about that, and they should be. From an enterprise standpoint, if you work for a company with thousands of employees, they're probably a little paranoid. They probably should be a lot paranoid. There's just a lot. This is moving so fast. There's a lot we don't understand. There are some things you can do to address some of these issues. The main one is if you don't have an AI policy for how your employees can and cannot utilize AI, that needs to happen ASAP. And then I think you also need a policy for anybody that you work with outside of your organization so they understand what you're doing, what you're not doing, and that they've given you permission to use anything that belongs in their domain, and that you're doing everything in a way that they're comfortable with. And then the ultimate thing you can do is what we've done. We are running an open source model completely offline. We bought a Mac Studio, and we have all of the data on an external hard drive, and we don't run the analysis until it's disconnected from the internet. And so anytime that machine is connected to the internet, it does not have access to any data, and we're not processing any data. So the only thing on the machine is basically the operating system and the model. That can be done with reasonably accessible consumer hardware today. Now, it's not the best model, and I tell my clients that want that level of security that you are giving up something. It's not going to do what I showed you earlier. It's not going to quite get you there, but it will be helpful, and it's getting there quickly. And I'm going to wrap up with this. This will give you an idea of how quickly this thing is blowing up. So on the left-hand side there, this is average spend on AI. So this is median and average. And so this is from from this month, June of 2026. The median spend of the companies that were surveyed, this is from RAMP, was $2,246. The average was $140,842. That is AI spend per month. So there are some companies out there spending bukus of money on AI right now. And so that gap between the mean and the median should give you an idea of there's a bunch of companies out there doing very little in AI, and there's a handful of companies that are just spending a ton of money. Now, whether or not they're getting a return on that investment or not is another debate, but there's a big gap there. And then on the right, that is Google AI Services tokens. Okay, so tokens is just the way AI measures data. So 1,000 tokens is roughly 750 words. But everything that you give an AI model, it converts into tokens. And so that's how they meter AI. So this is Google AI Services company-wide, spring of 2024, 9.7 trillion tokens. Okay? In 2 years, spring of 2026, in 2 years, that increased from 9.7 trillion to 3,200 trillion, or 3.2 quadrillion tokens. I forgot to do the math, but that's got to be like 350x in 2 years. It's an extraordinary amount of compute that is required to process those tokens. So if you're wondering what all this crazy stuff is about these data centers, that's what this is about. And then I think the last thing I'll leave you with here is I'm trying to think of what this looks like moving forward, because these new applications are very token intensive and very expensive. I think what you're going to see is people are going to develop kind of 3 types of tools that they're going to use for different applications. And so the most basic there would be an open source model, and an open source model is basically free to use, that you can download and operate on your local device. There's some small models that you can already run on your iPhone. There's a lot of models that you can run on a laptop. That's going to get better faster. And so a lot of that routine stuff that you do, I ask ChatGPT all the time, how do I fix my lawnmower because it's doing this? That's all going to be happening offline. You can do that in a plane with no internet access. It's going to be happening offline for essentially for free, the cost of the electricity on your local device. There's a middle layer there that might be some mixture of frontier closed source models and open source models that you're going to be able to operate on your laptop. And then the big projects, the big heavy usage stuff is going to be some combination of local machinery and utilizing the cloud. And that's the way we're going to be able to manage some of these costs. Most of what you're doing today is a major overkill. So if you select the highest level model on ChatGPT and ask it some basic question about, a recipe, one of my favorite things to do, that's a huge overkill. You're wasting a lot of tokens. You don't care about it because you're just paying $20 a month. But when you're paying on a per token basis, you definitely care about it. So those are some things to think about as we kind of move into the future. And when I say the future, I'm talking the next 1 to 2, maybe 3 years. Beyond that, I don't think anybody knows. So just to wrap up here, I think acting now's the time to get familiar with it. And it's easy to do. Just play with it. And if you can't think of anything to do with it, ask it what you can do with it. It's kind of non-intuitive, but it works. And then stay curious. And then, just be willing to think differently about where things are going and where you're at. These slides are available. That QR code on the left is a PDF of these slides. That QR code on the right is to follow me on LinkedIn. I put a lot of material about this on LinkedIn, so if you're interested in this topic, you might want to follow me there, and then that's my email address down there at the bottom. I'll be here the rest of the day. Feel free to track me down. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I will definitely be here the rest of the day, and don't hesitate to come track me down if there's a question.
We'll allow time for one question, if there are any.
Everybody's hungry. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd. I know there are a lot of people that are using this in a variety of ways already within their operations, and certainly Todd had some great suggestions up there on the screen as to how you could start to implement them with feed bin ordering and some items like that. So certainly check out those resources, talk amongst your colleagues, and see how you're using AI today. As we get ready to head into lunch, I do want to take one moment and thank all of our committee members that help put on the program every year. As we go through lunch, their names will pop up on one of the slides. So if you get a chance to acknowledge them today, please do that. Thank them for their time. They meet a couple of times a year to go through speakers and ideas and really try to make sure the program meets what we think the state of Iowa hog producers need for the following year.